Hello, and welcome to CodeMotion's DevCast English edition. I'm Joel Campbell. I will be your host for today, and I'm coming at you from the very hot city of Amsterdam. Now, what have we got today? We've got some really great talks in this whole collection of series of talks, but today is even better. We've got a talk by Marta van Hoofs on the talk CSS container queries. What are that? What are those? What are they for? Well, there are new CSS queries allowing components to adapt to their dimensions of its container and basically make the whole layout kind of way of using CSS much easier to use. So really exciting stuff on the bleeding edge of CSS. So if you like your designing and layout and all this, you're going to love this talk. We also have a little bit of news because we also have new great things coming to CSS. One of them is the aspect ratios, which we've all been waiting for. I'm sure you all know using iframes or videos or images can be a pain when you're trying to keep aspect ratios. So now this new feature is actually coming to CSS where you can actually kind of force and keep these aspect ratios of depending on different layouts. So that's really cool. Another thing which I feel like we've been waiting forever for, so long that I think it even has gone out of fashion, and that is that you can now do native masonry support with CSS. So if you know the website Pinterest, then you'll know what masonry looks like. And basically now there is going to be a CSS feature that allows you to do this natively without using all this terrible JavaScript. So it's going to be really efficient. So that's great. It's taken a long while to get here, but at least it's pretty much here now. And lastly, there is the marker pseudo element, and I feel like this should have already existed. But when I read it, I was like, oh, it's a new feature in CSS, which if you have the listed kind of bulleted elements, you can now target the marker of each list element, and you can then change the color, size, or whatever you want to do. So CSS is getting better and better, it seems. And from this talk, I'm sure you're going to find out even more. So without further ado, let me introduce Marta van Hoof. And I hope you can take it away, Marta.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Gerald, for the announcement. Yes, some nice things, very nice things are coming to CSS, and one of them is our container queries. Let me tell you all about them. Container queries. Let's set the scene. Let's say we have an application, and in that application is a dashboard. And on that dashboard, there are several widgets, like a gauge widget, which tells you the process to completion of something, a pie chart of your favorite Snickers or Twix bars, a weather widget where you can display the current weather outside. And in this case, I think my prototype is quite spot on. Maybe you want to create a list of users widget. And then one day your client steps in the office and says, people, we need to make these widgets customizable for our users. The user has to be able to resize the widget, make it larger on its dashboard, because a pie chart about Twix and Snickers bars is so important that I want to watch that when I open the dashboard. Well, when we open up that dashboard, why not show some more information, because we have the screen real estate available for us now. Same thing for the weather widget. Why not, if we can enlarge the weather widget and have more space available, why not show the precipitation or the precipitation and the upcoming temperatures for the next week? How can we code such dashboard up? I've coded up some markup and some CSS. I'm using a modular way of writing CSS, so no utility classes in this talk. I'm very sorry. And I am using the BEM naming methodology for writing my CSS classes. So we have our dashboard, our main content. Let's take a look at that. Forget the header, forget the sidebar for half an hour. And we're going to say, okay, each widget has the shared widget class and has its own variant, widget gauge, widget pi, widget weather, and so on and so on. That is reflected within the CSS. And if we want to enlarge a widget, we'll add another variant class to it. For instance, widget large. Maybe we have shared widget large properties. Maybe we have specific properties for the pi widget. And the same thing goes for the weather widget as well. Now, next day, our client steps in. Okay, those widgets are looking super cool. I want to reuse them in other applications. So I want you guys and girls to build us a design system. Okay, let's create a design system. We're the design system team now. We're the ones creating the widgets, and thus we have no knowledge of the final implementation of those widgets in other applications. Maybe there are other teams working on that application. Maybe the design system goes public, goes out into the wild. Well, one challenge for us then is, how do we guarantee an optimal layout for each widget? First, we need to split up the widgets in their own domain. So we're splitting up the dashboard into an application domain. That's something the other teams will take care of. And we're going to split up take the widget business logic and put them in the design system domain. But this way of working requires the application domain to explicitly set the widget variant. So we need to have business logic in place to first set the dashboard grid, and then set the weather widget size based on the user preference. Each dependent application has to have knowledge about the widget, the available variants. How can we make the design system more plug and playable? How can we create automatic reusability? Well, we could use media queries. Not that interesting in this case, because media queries rely on the viewport dimension to change, to work. And maybe your design system isn't used on a dashboard. Like I said, we don't have any knowledge about the final implementation. Maybe your widget can be used below an article or other places you didn't think of. So we have no exact correlation between the viewport and the final implementation. In JavaScript, there's a thing called the resize observer, where we say, okay, resize observer, look at this element, and when it matches these constraints, use a type of functionality to or do some business logic. Problem here is that we have to wait for the client-side JavaScript to be executed, and that can take some time depending on the device and the CPU strength of the device. And then you might get a flash of unstyled content. Same thing goes for server-side rendered application, your classic server-side rendered frameworks, and your newer React, if you think Next.js, Nuxt.js, all will have to wait for that client-side JavaScript to be ready to enable the resize observers. Okay, you could work around those issues, but it's not ideal. So what are we looking for? We're looking for something in CSS, because CSS is the layout is computed before JavaScript. We need to be able to set the user in preference in the dependent layout. So only our dependent application has to set some way of, has to do something that without our widget knowing what it does, or without the dashboard knowing anything about the widget. And it has to act on the container sizes within the widget. And good news, something's cooking, something's coming up. And I'm cooking as well because it's getting hot in here. But first, let me introduce myself to you. My name is Martin. I am a front-end developer at Isaac, which is part of the Interacto group. We are based in the lovely city of Eindhoven, but today I'm still working at home, but things are afoot. Next to being a front-end developer, I'm also an open source advocate, so I try to create awareness around open source sustainability and try to get my colleagues to contribute back to the open source community. And I'm also an open API advocate. That means I try to tell and educate my peers on how to use and why to use Open API in their front-end workflows, because I've noticed very much benefits with using that specification. At Isaac, we do advanced projects for e-commerce and e-finance clients, things like identity management, complex integrations. We're not shy of taking on complex problems, and that's why our slogan still is to this day, we love .complexity. Okay, let's take a look how we got at a moment where we require modular adaptability, why we need something that can act on container dimensions, and something that we need something in CSS. So from 2007 till 2010, we saw the birth of the mobile web. iOS was announced, Android was created. We saw media queries coming into CSS3, and we had to cope with that, to cope with the new mobile browsers, developers created M.dot websites. Do you still remember those? Please, if you do, put your best M.dot website down in the chat. But that stopped in 2010, 25th of May of 2010 to be exact, when Ethan Marcotte published his responsive web design article on A List Apart. His idea was, well, why two separate websites? Why can't we just have one website that is adaptive to its dimensions, that can have a fluid grid instead of a fixed one, that shows and hides stuff, content, with the help of media queries. And from 2010, since that article until now, we've seen that responsiveness grow even more and more. We've seen web applications become way more advanced, and it brought us things like modular CSS. Okay, instead of one big CSS file, let's chop it up, make some modules of them. Methodologies like SMAX, Atomic Design, provided those methodologies. We had things like Bootstrap coming up. Developer, here you go, plug and play CSS framework to create your application in. We saw the rise of modular JS. Same thing with JS. We want to chop it up to different parts we can reuse. Now we're finally at a unified way of importing and exporting modules in our JavaScript. And on that, the modular CSS and modular JS, we saw the rise of UI frameworks like Vue, React, Svelte, and browser native web components. So now we're at a point where we both need reusability of our components, of our CSS and JavaScript, and those components, reusable components, need to be adaptable to their surroundings, to their final implementation. And that's where container queries come in. So, container queries. Container queries allow any element with both size and layout containment to be queried using a new add container rule with similar syntax to existing media queries. A little bit formal, but let me show you some code and you'll know what to do. So we have a widget, or in this case, a container. And that container that we want to query, want to give notice to the browser, hey, look at these dimensions, because we want to query them. We have to give a contain property. A contain property is part of the containment specification. And we have to give that contain property the layout value, the inline size, and style value. Basically, in a nutshell, what it does is say to the browser, hey, look at my dimensions. Don't let any other elements on the page look at my dimensions, only my descendants. And don't let my descendants look at other elements with the containment query. The contain property. And then we can use the container query, just like the media query, to query the dimensions of the container and style the descending elements appropriately. Easy as that. The leading force behind container queries is Miriam Suzanne. She's a core contributor to the Sass language. She's a writer for Smashing Magazine, for CSS Tricks. She writes lots of articles on her own blog. And currently, she is an invited expert at the W3C CSS working group, where she's actively working on container queries. The specification of container queries is still in draft. There's still being discussions had about what should it contain and what other details, so that it's useful for as many use cases as possible. And it's an extension and part of the CSS containment spec. So that's that contain property that you saw in the previous slide. I guess something went like Miriam saw that containment specification and thought, we can build container queries on this one. Let's do that. Don't know the history, but I'm guessing something like that. Okay, container queries. How are we going to implement container queries on our dashboard? Well, let's clean up this mess and only show you the things that we use, like the weather widget CSS. Okay, weather widget CSS. So we're going to put a contain property on the widget, and that contain property is shared with all widgets, because all widgets should have the contain property in this case. And then you might think, okay, let's query that widget. Well, that's not possible. Container queries require that you have a container, and that container has the containment context, and only the descendants of that container can query its container. So this is not possible, the code I'm showing you here, but what is possible is that we create a child that can query its parent, which has the containment context. And that's it. So going back to our needs, what do we need? We need something in CSS. Check. We need something that can, where the user preference can be set in the dependent layout. So we can use CSS Grid or Flexbox in our dependent application, the dashboard application, and depending on how the CSS grid is set and how the columns and the rows are laid out, the widget gets a certain size. And thanks to container queries, the widgets can act on their own dimensions. Okay, that's all the more formal and more educational stuff. What I'm now going to show you are some examples, but first, a bit of warning. The specification is still in draft, so things might change. You can experiment with container queries in Chrome Canary with the enable container queries flag enabled, but you must insist that you do not use this code in production just yet. So, some examples, some experiments. First experiment I'm going to show you, I'll put the links in the show notes. First experiment I'm going to show you is a responsive component demo. It's a website that is a plant shop, and each plant is marked up in a container element with the class, an element with the class container. And if we inspect, I'm going to make my screen a little bit larger. If we inspect each markup, each product, we can see that we have a product container, figure with image, H3, span, description in a paragraph, and a button. Now, and you might see this now already. If we go look into the CSS, we see that the product has the contain style layout inline size property set. And we can see that there's a container query set with a max width of 200 pixels. So that means all products smaller than 200 pixels get this layout with a border 1 pixel with that color, that border radius. So I guess that's those are these products. We can also see that the description and the button are hidden, so that's correct. And we can also see that from a minimal width of 350 pixels, the product container gets a flex. And we can cheat a little bit and zoom in. And we can see that because there's more space available here, so it crosses the 200 pixel threshold, it gets another layout. More things are visible. Also, these products in the grid change because the threshold of 350 pixels is crossed. So this example shows us that we can use a single CSS component and that we can reuse that single CSS component in different kinds of layouts according to the space that's available. Another component, another experiment that I'm going to show you is a shopping cart. Oh no, I spoiled it already. Oh, too bad. So there's a big product list here, and that product list is created in a web component. We can change the quantity. We can do something with images. We see images, titles, descriptions, and when we make the screen smaller, you lose some information or you gain some information. But you might think, oh, cool, media queries. This thing is laid out with media queries. No, I laid it out with container queries because this product list is not only used on this page, but also in the mini card on the right upper side. This is the same component as this big one. But because the drop-down content container only has a smaller width than the product page, the layout of the product list will be adapted to the available space. So reusability, not only of CSS components, but also of JavaScript components, Vue components, web components, React components, and so on. And the last thing I want to show you are responsive inline SVGs. More so, responsive inline SVG sprites. So if you load an SVG through a image tag, you already have this kind of responsive SVG. There's quite a few articles out there that already explain this, because the SVG is in its own document. It will act like it will use the media queries defined in the SVG, like container queries, like we see them now. So you can use SVGs, image SVGs, let's call them that, and make them responsive according to the space they're used in. Well, I like to use inline SVGs because then I can style and customize SVGs within the application. And more so, I like to use SVG sprites because I can reuse SVGs throughout my application. Just have to define them once, and I can easily reuse them. Now, because SVGs can contain style tags, can contain CSS, we can also start to use container queries within SVGs. And we can also start like I defined here. And I'm going to use that Stegosaurus here, and it's in a resizable container. And when I enlarge the container, you can see from a certain threshold, it loses the border. It gets restyled according to the available space. I can do the same thing with the Diplodocus, but the Diplodocus maybe has another breakpoint where it should lose its styles. And this way, our designers or our design team can create SVGs that can be reused throughout different types of application, which can be customized by the application itself. Think icons that need to be the text color of the application they're in. And they can also be responsive according to the spacing they get. Think of a logo with a circle and a name next to it. Well, maybe on mobile devices or small spaces, you just want to show the emblem, and on bigger spaces, you want to show the full logo. So those are a few experiments available. I'm sure more and more are coming up as this thing gets bigger and bigger. So we're nearly there yet. Let's round it off. Container queries. Container queries allow that any element with both size and layout containment can be queried using a new container rule with a similar syntax like media queries. So we have our contain property that we set on our container and a add container rule that we use with our descendants. It's still a draft. It's still a draft, and it's bound to change. You can experiment with it on Chrome Canary with the enable container queries flag enabled, and they're still discussing about why not use container queries with responsive images, so we can even more get the right image for the right kind of spacing. They're talking about if they could make a match media equivalent for JavaScript. So the match media method allows us to query media queries in JavaScript. Why not do that? Do something like that for container queries. And they're also talking about container query units, like we have viewport units. Discussions are being held in the open. You can check it out on the GitHub page, on the W3C CSS Working Group's draft project. You're happily invited to contribute if you have any thoughts or questions or use cases that you'd like to see be fulfilled by container queries. And that's it. Thank you for watching. Thank you for CodeMotion for having me. You can find me on my website, mrtnvh.com, at my Twitter. And if you like what you see and think, those people at Isaac have very much interesting things to tell to us, well, we have a bunch of job openings left. Go check out the website. Come join us. Come have a coffee. I'm happy to invite you. Thank you very much. Peace.
Wow, thanks, Marta. That was great. That's really cool. These queries, super useful for modular stuff, for sure. It's still in experimental, right, stages?
Yeah, it's very experimental. The specification itself is a draft. So they're working out all the kinks and all the how do you say that in English? Yeah, they're trying to find as many use cases where container queries could be used. And as other things in web browsers, things always have to be backwards compatible. I don't see very much issues with that, but they want to create a sturdy specification that can be held on for years.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. You don't want to come out with this thing half-baked. By the way, if anyone's wanting to ask any questions to Marta, like I am doing right now, then please use the comments in whatever you're watching on YouTube, I believe. Then you can ask Marta, and hopefully he can get to you. But for now, everyone's just extremely happy with you giving the talk. We've got Fleur de Kroon thanking you for the talk. So everyone's
my pleasure.
Super excited about the container queries. But your talk was too good, Marta. You've explained it too thoroughly.
Wow. You're making me glad.
Yeah, with like how do you see? I mean, you've showed so many examples of this kind of container queries, but how do you find? First of all, how do you find out about these things as a front-end developer?
Internet.
Right.
No, okay, that's too general of an answer. No. So container queries or element queries, the discussion has been going on for a while now. There's several Vue and React hook implementations to JavaScript implementations, like the resize observer API, like I showed you, that try to mimic the use case that container queries try to solve. From conversations I heard, listening to podcasts, listening to Miriam Suzanne talk about it, it was quite difficult for browsers to implement the container query specification itself. It was unlike media queries, where we can just write media queries and they act on the viewport. We can just write container queries. They found out, because when we're allowed to write container queries without that contain property, well, the browser has to take every element size into account, and then performance goes way down. So yeah, it's not until that contain property showed up, which allowed to which gave browsers some performance benefits and allowed elements to say, "Hey, look at my size. Please look at my dimensions." That they could uh, build upon that to create the container queries. And
It's just
I think the needs right there. We want to create as much reusable components as possible. Look at, for example, ING, who has their own web component library for all their application within their company. You want to be as adaptable as possible. Yeah.
for sure. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Especially, yeah, as implementations of certain projects are constantly changing. You're not always doing the same old website nowadays. You might be doing modular parts of things. You might be making tools, web application. Yeah, it's the list is much larger than it used to be. So
Yeah, and requirements change. You're making a design system for these bunch of requirements, but a few years later, oh, this requirement is been added, and container queries is that one thing that we can give to developers to build a sturdy layout that is future proof.
right, yeah, for sure. You mentioned you're quite an open source enthusiast.
Yes.
And I always ask this question because I really want to contribute, and I do on a very small scale, but not as large as I would like to.
Mm-hmm.
And I picked up on your talk that you're an enthusiast and you try and promote this kind of thing. So, how someone like me who wants to get more involved, how would someone do that?
Well, a good place to start is the easiest place to start is to create a GitHub account. But I'll
Hopefully, you're that far.
I'll take it that you're that far already. Well, there is a you how shall I put it? You have these GitHub issues. Every project has its own issues, and depending on the difficulty, and maintainers might put a good first issue tag on each issue. So like, oh, this documentation is outdated, or this needs a small test, or it depends on a lot of parameters, of course. But maintainers could, and maintainers, several maintainers do put a good first issue label on issues. So you can go to GitHub, type in a search for good first issue, and see if there's any project that you'd like to contribute to that has these good first issues. Also, you can, maybe you're using several projects already in your day-to-day workflow. I want to contribute back because they're so helpful for me. Maybe check out their project for good first issues.
I couldn't agree more with the point that you should try and contribute to stuff that you're using already, because that's how I got my foot in the door, really, was just actually finding problems and fixing them. And then you just happen to then become a contributor. But I was quite bright-eyed at the start because I wanted to contribute to React and Angular and thinking that I could just stroll in and pick up an issue. But those issues go much quicker. So I don't know. That's my 50 cent.
That's why they often say the documentation is a good place to start, because you have to actually read the documentation before for updating it. Yeah, and just dive in and find something that you can relate to, and where the source codes might make some sense to you, and start contributing on that. It's always helpful to do to maintainers to give a analysis, maybe some code examples, maybe a reproduction of an error, and shoot in a pull request if that's possible.
Awesome. no one else wants to jump in here, but I've got lots of questions. I just wanted to ask, yeah, as also a front end developer, what would you find, yeah, has been changing in in these last years, let's say, in this kind of how we as front enders work with designers, and would you say, yeah, like you showed that timeline, for example, and showed how we're changing into this more modular approach. Is there anything else you think that has come along to us front enders and really helped
Yeah,
things along?
sure. Biggest thing is independence from other parts of projects. We saw the rise of the REST API, of the Jamstack, where we can entirely create full-on server-side and client-side rendered applications with JavaScript. We saw TypeScript coming up, so typing on a browser language, also super cool for larger projects, I guess. What else? Yeah, more independence. The entire tool chain of a front end developer now is almost is entirely JavaScript based. So if something goes wrong, you can debug it yourself. Where it used to might be you have some bash scripts lying around. Maybe you don't know that. So it's yeah, more control for a front end developer. On the
Mm,
other side, and that's a positive side, and the more negative side is that we're shipping more and more and more kilobytes of code to users when it might not be good for them.
mm,
So of course, the big JavaScript frameworks always send this kind of their framework. So it's a double. So
yeah.
both good things, both negative things, but there's things cooking. People always try to evolve. So React is trying to work with what was it, server components, so that they only put out pieces of component. I'm not really known in the React world.
Right. Yeah.
Something I heard, but I know that the creator of PKpack, Skypack,
Right.
has created a new framework, a JavaScript-based framework, where there's the possibility to create a website without JavaScript. Remember those days when you had websites that or users that didn't allow JavaScript on their
Yeah.
devices. So yeah, there's lots of going on. The front end world changes
Yeah.
every day, and that's both good and not so good sometimes.
Exciting world to live in, definitely.
Yes,
I
that's it.
mean, just look at this container query stuff. We're constantly being thrown in new features. Okay, final question, real quick. Favorite thing in CSS and your pet peeve? I hate it and I want it to die. And, um, go.
Favorite thing in CSS now, of course, container queries. Um,
I was gonna say, don't mention container queries.
oh, don't mention. Okay. CSS custom properties. I would say that's
Oh,
also
yeah.
been a long time coming. Having
Oh, yeah.
dynamic properties into the CSS language itself, being able to be dynamically change CSS properties in websites. That's pretty cool. With the change of a few variables, you can restyle your website from light to dark mode. So that's something I'm very keen of. Pet peeve was IE11, but Microsoft beat me to it. So they're finally digging that hole for IE11. Still, some clients ask, can we support IE11? And we have to do the whole talk about why it's not good. Slowly, Safari on iOS is becoming my pet peeve.
Yeah.
Just today, I saw the announcement that the new Safari version broke IndexedDB. Browsers like Edge and Chrome could solve that in an instant with an automatic update. Now we have to wait until the next iOS update is available. iOS update is available. Not having, I don't know. It's always hard.
That's good.
Double.
You've named enough. I don't want you to. We want to give CSS a good send off. So
Yeah. CSS, super cool.
well, thank you so much, Marta. There was a really fantastic talk and really great to hear your opinion on these great things.
Thank you for having me.
No problem. Just to the watchers, we do have a feedback form in the comments. It's 3 questions, real quick, and it helps us immensely. So if you guys could, yeah, it's on the screen now, just click on that link and just quickly fill out those answers, then that helps us a lot. So upcoming events, we have more CodeMotion DevCast events coming up. If you enjoyed this one, we've had so many good English and multiple other languages. Great topics if you're really interested in these kind of things. So sign up, it's free, easy to do. So check out the CodeMotion DevCast website for more info. For now, that's it. That's all we have time for. And thanks for watching. Thanks for coming by, and have a nice evening and hopefully enjoy the heat like I will. All right. See you later. Bye-bye.